I am your host of the daily live conversations for the trades, and tonight we are diving into the conversations surrounding how to effectively, successfully transition and succeed a family business, passing it down from one generation to the next. We've been talking about this over the last 2 days, and I want to dig deeper into the first examination of the first entity that we need to take into consideration, which is the individuals involved and the relationships between those involved. And to that point, we talk about business so often. We talk about the family entity, but this other entity of the actual individual relationships and the individuals, each one of those, the relationship dynamics between each person needs to be taken into consideration because it is going to be fundamentally impossible to maintain the health and integrity of the family nucleus and unit, and then also the success of the business. And so the health of the business, the health of the family is predicated on these relationships. So this is why it is so important that we take time to really consider, okay, how do we do this well? And it's on the backs of these relationships being good to begin with. And so to that point, as I think about successful relationships, as I've experienced with my dad and my brother, I'm one of 6 children, and I also witnessed my dad being a third generation business owner in the trades. And it was a business, is a business started by my great grandfather in 1922. My brother and I joined as partners 4 years ago, and we've learned a lot through trial and error. And it's been messy, it's been difficult, and it's also been incredibly meaningful because I've gotten to know my dad specifically in a whole new light, and I've gotten closer to my brother too. And really, with my dad, that was kind of a shining moment. When families work together, it's high risk. And I never understood that term, high risk and high reward, until this dynamic, because a lot is on the line. There was a moment where my dad said at one point, like, I wasn't sure that this would work, and genuinely, like, we were actually doing it, having the conversations, working together. And at one point he was like, I didn't know if we'd be able to get through this because it is hard. And if you don't have a foundation that's strong in terms of conflict resolution, it's near impossible to learn how to do conflict resolution when the stakes are so high, when it's not just the relationship itself that's on the line, but also the business, the 100 years on the line. And so to that point, this concept of, okay, how do we do relationships well interpersonally? And then we can talk about the success of the business and the success of the family as a result. But first, we have to get you and me good. And so it's like a marriage, honestly. And people talk about that. Partnerships are like a marriage. Well, running a family business is like a marriage in and of itself. How do we do conflict? How do we make sure that we're aligned and we're in unity together? How do we make sure that emotions are kept at bay? And that element around keeping emotions at bay is a huge one. Because if we're not cognizant and we're not aware of what's going on beneath the surface, then we're going to have a lot subconsciously that's going to be powering us and moving us forward that we don't know is actually competing with kind of our logical brains. And so until we really understand the EQ and the IQ, the intellectual intelligence with the emotional intelligence, one is constantly going to be competing with the other in terms of emotions vying for a seat at the table because we haven't been giving them a voice. So, to when my dad had this moment, to that point of, I wasn't sure if we'd be able to make it through in the family business, it was because he needed to talk about some things. There were some things that my brother and I were doing that really rubbed him wrong. He had been running this thing by himself for nearly 40 years. Of course it's going to be hard having 2 kids get involved, trying to help and bring kind of new age, new ways of doing things. And of course that's going to be a challenge. And so being able to implement systems, we talk about systems and processes who are running the business. What about systems and processes who are running relationships? And making sure that we're putting in safeguards and boundaries to protect and preserve what it is that's so important. A friend of mine, he had a family business, and now they sold the business so successfully, but they don't talk anymore. The family doesn't. They're not connected, they're not engaged. And so what's the hierarchy of priorities? So when it comes to maintaining the relationships, there's 3 steps for me that is of utmost importance that I honor first and foremost before I go and engage with my dad, brother, much less so customers and the rest of our team. 3 steps to make sure I'm good and I'm taking radical responsibility over my own self. Number 1, slow down. That is huge, and actually, this isn't just in terms of me taking responsibility for myself, but slowing down is also key to innovation, building upon what is currently working. There's a book by Jim Collins, From Good to Great, and if we wanna take a good company and make it great, we actually need to slow down and assess what's going on. Work on the business, not just work in the business. Same thing with you and me. Work on ourselves, not just be constantly living life and kind of in the moment. We need to take that third person out of body experience and analyze, oh, how's Christine Marie doing today? How are you doing? And taking that time to slow down and really press into the business, the family, and to our own individual selves. That is so important because it allows for, yes, innovation, and it also allows for the working out of things, the kinks and the broken pieces of ourselves and our business that are necessary to get to the next level. It's effectively coming in and like bandaging up and reorienting, reconnecting wires, reprogramming old programs that shouldn't be there anymore. All of those parts are necessary in the business. And each one of those pieces is important in you and me to do for ourselves. So slowing down, that's number 1. Number 2 is leaning in. And when I say leaning in, it's when we see something that's broken, it's actually leaning into the brokenness of, ooh, like, why is it? This is one of the things I notoriously see for most home service businesses. There's a breakdown in what's called the customer journey. So every single step that the customer takes from the second that they know that they've got a problem to the end result of ideally they've purchased a product or service from you and with you. That whole spectrum of what takes place in that process is the customer journey. And usually there's a breakdown. Often it's from the process from sales to production. That's usually where there's the weakest link. And so that's a broken system. And that's when we see something that's broken, a lot of times people kind of want to be like, oh, it's fine. It's not my problem. But when we actually lean into, and when I say lean in, it's examining. It's taking up the pieces and being like, "Oh, what's wrong with this? Why is this broken?" And same thing goes for you and me. Leaning into whatever it is that we're sensing as a problem and really leaning into, a lot of times it's an emotion. A lot of times there's an emotion that's sparking that's not pleased with what's happening. And the more we actually slow down, that's step number 1, and 2, lean into it. And then third, ask why. Why is this breakdown happening between sales and production? And then what do we need to do? But first, why? What is really going on? The systemic problem. It's tracing all the way down to the root issue, the core. And sometimes it may not be a department problem, it's an individual problem. It could be a leadership problem. It could be something completely different than what effectively we first see at the surface level. That's why we need to go down to what's hidden beneath the iceberg to the root problem of what's really going on. Same for you and me. What is the why? What's really going on underneath the surface that frankly is going to erupt at some point? There's in Iceland. I went to Iceland in 2016. Beautiful country. I highly, highly recommend it, especially in winter. It was like, I don't even have the word for it. It was glorious in some ways. It was fascinating, and I've never been to another country like it. I felt like I was on Mars. It was all white and with black sand beaches, just covered in snow. The sun rises. It's a 2-hour sunrise. It rises super, super late in the morning. It makes its way to about 11 o'clock in the sky. It doesn't make it all the way up or set. It just goes up until about 11. It sits in the sky for a couple of hours, and then it takes another 2-hour sunset. So 2-hour sunrise, hangs out at around 11 o'clock, and then sets for 2 hours. And it is just immaculate. And in Iceland, they have these things called geysers, and they're hot springs, but they're very, very dangerous because what ends up happening is that there's so much pressure underneath the ground that finally it erupts, and it's this massive like shooting of water up into the sky. So these hot springs explode, and it's so intense and so dangerous. You don't want to be too close. And that's what happens with you and me if we don't take the time to slow down, lean in, and ask why. And that's what happens with our businesses too. it erupts. There's an eruption of a massive problem, a massive explosion, because we have not taken the due diligence. When businesses are looking to get acquired by private equity, they do what's called due diligence, and it's an arduous process. One of the companies that we were fractional chief marketing officer for, we were creating all of the data that was necessary, a lot for the marketing side, but also some of the other financial sides as well, just because financials is so involved with the marketing spend. And they were doing due diligence. And you know what? We were learning things about the company because of their good questions. And that's what we need to be doing of ourselves, asking why and going deeper and deeper and deeper till we get to the roots and the real source of what's really going on. Just jumping over here into the chat. Brian, good to see you. I'm so glad you're here. I'm just kind of jumping through. Dub Styles, I'm so glad. Elijah. So really quickly, I just want to tell, Elijah asked, why do you have different channels? So for those of you who don't know, Foundation First Marketing is branding marketing for digital, or not digital, it's digital marketing for trades businesses. Whereas this other show that I have is called The Knowing Show. And that is much more so just general content around becoming emotionally intelligent leaders across any industry. So this conversation is really more so focused on building the business and building the leaders that we need in order to grow in the trades industry. And I really started this channel for people like my dad, and started this business for people like my dad, because there's not as much content directed for folks in the trades. And so the other channel, The Knowing Show, is I think it's more general, whereas this conversation is more niche and more targeted to folks who are in the trades. And frankly, people who are in the trades, so there's such a respect that I hold for them, because there's something about being tactile in terms of the way you engage. Like, you're physically involved in manual labor. That is so intense and so grueling. And there's an element there where, there's just a level of grit and endurance that I've witnessed in my dad, I've witnessed in my brothers. I've had and then there's the other side. I was just out to dinner last night or 2 nights ago with a couple who own a septic company. The gentleman, they're both co-owners, the husband and wife. The man is out there, driving the truck, and the wife drove the truck 10 times and hated it and does all the office work. So both people are necessary for the success of any trades business. So I've done more so the office side of things. But man, even walking the job sites and going into the crawl space and seeing the tight spaces that people crawl into, going to the septic fields, going out and being boots on the ground warrants such respect. And frankly, I want to do more of that, just to understand the perspective that's brought from the operators. But then there's also the owner perspective, who the owners aren't the ones out there boots on the ground. They're more strategic and more business oriented. And so the goal of the Foundation First Marketing channel is to really grow us in a holistic way. I'm just looking here at the chat. Brian asked such a good question. How do you deal with someone in a position of power who wants you to fail? I think it really depends on what level of standing or status you hold in the business and what level they hold. That's such a different, you kind of go about it two completely different ways. I'll actually use an example of someone I know well. He was the president of a company, and people wanted him to fail. And what ended up happening was that technically they won. They spread a lie about him, and he failed. And what he did was so admirable. He technically failed because he got demoted because of this lie. And what he did that was so admirable to me was that he allowed for the evolving knowledge of the truth to come out in an organic way, because there's something around the truth that it wants to come to light. Like, the truth wants to be known. And the more we actually, speaking of The Knowing Show, we were talking about this on The Knowing Show, the more tightly we hold on to things, the more actually it's like the tighter we grasp, the less power and control we have over it. It's very odd. And I think that's the same principle goes with truth. The more we're tightly holding on to making sure everybody knows my side and my story, it's like there's not the organic involvement and almost like the maturing effect of the truth kind of building its own. And I'm trying, this sounds a little bit existential right now, but I've seen it happen, and I'm curious if you all have too. There's something around letting the truth come to light on its own. And sometimes it does require us taking the spotlight and shining the light on the truth and coming to know it for ourselves. But man, when we're in a group setting, the less we can hold on tightly to an outcome, and then allow for curiosity of like, oh, I wonder how this is for me, and allowing for us to grow and change for whatever happens that we can control. So the president who was demoted unfairly, frankly, he allowed for himself to grow as a result of that, and allowed for the truth to come out. And then he also went and addressed the lie to that person when he was no longer angry. He allowed for himself to let go of the outcome. He allowed for himself to be demoted. And then he pursued the truth on an individual basis rather than trying to loudly stand at the microphone trying to defend himself. And the way he handled that, I think the biggest thing is we can only handle our own selves, and his ability to do that for how he felt led. There's no one size fits all in that case or in that scenario. The most and best we can do is what is honorable for me? What are my values? Who do I want to be? How do I want to show up? How do I feel led to lead in this season? We were talking even earlier about how, the truth is, there's absolute truths, yes, and there's also truths for this season of life. Like, there's seasons where I need something very specific, and then there's other seasons where I need something else to help me grow. And he was able to really let go of this need to be justified in the moment, and in so doing, he was allowing himself to mature internally and grow as a result of the challenge that lie forced. And then when it was time, he took the opportunity to speak the truth, but he allowed for it to be timing rather than a forcing of the issue. So I really, really respect that. And I admire that so much. Um, Dub Styles says, absolutely a good example of emotional maturity. I completely agree. I was so impressed. I was like, man, I want to have that level of emotional maturity where I don't need to go and defend myself, and I can kind of trust the process of what truth will inevitably do, which is the truth sets you free. And so the more that we allow the truth to come out in its own time, the more freedom there is in that. Elijah, I actually like this content more than the Knowing podcast. It seems relevant to my career goals. Cool. Come and hang out. I'm gonna be going live every day for the next, I guess I'm day 3 of my 61-day challenge. So I've got I've got 58 more days to go after this. So, y'all, thank you so much for joining. I will be going live again tomorrow night after the Knowing show. So I'll probably be live around this time. So with that, thank you all so much for joining me tonight. I will see you tomorrow morning. For those of you who join the Knowing show at 8:30 a.m. Eastern, but for those of you who are only tuning into the Foundation First Marketing live daily conversations, I will see you tomorrow evening, likely around 9 p.m. Eastern. So with that, have a wonderful evening, y'all, and I will talk to you soon.